Good evening, welcome to Lateline. Farmers on the McIntyre River in Queensland say the $13 billion national plan to save the Murray-Darling river system is a failure. They argue the plan, which pays irrigators millions of taxpayer dollars to save water, allows those same irrigators to catch replacement water off the floodplains, water the farmers say would otherwise flow back into the river system and onto New South Wales. It's being described as a failure at all levels of government, resulting in large volumes of water being held back from states downstream. Lateline's Kerry Brewster reports with this exclusive story.
There's only bitter disappointment for this Queensland family as it salvages the latest damaged cotton crop.
We're picking this cotton right now and it's a disaster. One minute you're picking cotton fine, the next you've swallowed some huge stick that's come in on the floodwater, so it's just a miserable time. So we're just at complete despair.
12 months ago, it was a very different story. The Levees had a bumper crop.
We haven't been farming that long. We've started from scratch, man. We thought this was our year. My dad could have retired, and Mum and Dad could have retired. So that we had huge prices, huge crops. We were really rubbing our hands together, and then overnight it was gone.
Here, the McIntyre River is the border between Queensland and New South Wales. Regular flooding is critical in the complex balance of this huge ecosystem. Water flows across the floodplains on either side, then drains back into the river at the headwaters of the great Murray-Darling River system that runs all the way to the South Australian coast.
As the river rises and falls, it breaks out into all these myriad of channels. They're called braided systems because the channels break out and they split and they rejoin.
It might only be 5Ks, 10Ks, 20Ks, but it will make its way back to that river unless it's interfered with, and it is being interfered with big time, and these guys are turning a blind eye to it. The floodwater comes up here and it's a torrent. It's normally dry.
A flood in August last year began as any other when water started pushing up this creek. 50 kilometres upstream at Gundawindi, the river peaked at 7.9 metres. A good flood, but still nearly 3 metres below the record peak in 2011.
We're expecting the low-lying areas to get covered with water. We've got some country down on the creek here that would have been covered. It was battened down the hatches. We knew what we were in for, but when the flood came in, it was at record levels.
2011 didn't even compare to it.
It just didn't make sense. 2011 was 10.8 metres, so it was just a huge amount of water missing out of the river, but we still got smashed. It was insane. Just all water, 4,100 acres of water.
The flood inundated the Levee farm. But for downstream neighbour Clay Marr, separated from the Levees by a single farming operation, it remained dry.
We had nothing, absolutely nothing. A little bit of a run in this front creek just behind us, and apart from that, nothing.
Did that make sense to you?
Absolutely not.
Anything downstream, there was no flood.
What was happening downstream?
Well, people were crying out for water. There was no overland flow. The river was still in its banks.
While the Levees' property was underwater, only 3 kilometres downstream, a local environment group was holding a family field day on the dry banks of the river.
Well, they drove the cars down the Levee. It was massive flooding upstream of the Levee, and they went down the river and looked at the species living on the riverbank. It was dry. It was council people fishing down there, local council people. They didn't realise there was a flood on. When we found there was no flood downstream, we got a chopper straight away and we went to the air and we tracked down what was going wrong.
The Levees flew over the neighbouring property.
And what we found were just massive amounts of earthwork, just chronically all across the floodplain. Banks north-south across the flow of the water. Some look like roads, some are banks to hold floodwater out.
So we'll show you some of our recent. What they were looking at, according to river ecologist Bill Johnson, was in effect a big dam.
This is a levee. It's a raised earthwork across the floodplain. It runs from the McIntyre River over here in the distance, north for many kilometres, and it's built at right angles to the floodplain. The water flows from this side to this side, and it's held up on that side on the Levee family property. In effect, it's a dam.
And a big dam?
It's not very high, but it's very, very long. Yeah, it's a big dam.
The Lamies say their property was underwater for 7 weeks.
It just didn't go away. It just hung around and hung around. Where we're standing, it was knee deep, 50 odd centimetres here. It was terminal for the crops.
Looking at all our hard work just sitting in metres of water was just devastating.
The field day held on the dry downstream riverbank during that flood was attended by John Norman, who operates the property the Lamies flew over. John Norman is a new breed of farmer. Harvard Business School educated, he and his family own or operate 8 or more properties that make up Norman Farming, a large-scale cotton business stretching 30 kilometres north across the floodplain. He's well known in the district and related by marriage to his local federal MP, the LNP's David Littleproud. Yeah, hi John. Yes, it's Kerry Brewster from ABC TV. I'd like to ask you some questions about how you're operating your farms, particularly in relation to how you're gathering water. I wanted to ask John Norman if he knew where all the water went last year, but he declined my interview request. In a statement to Lateline, John Norman says this is a road constructed long before he moved onto the property and that it has drains to allow floodwaters through. As part of the national $13 billion plan to return water to the river system, Norman Farming has received at least $7 million, all of which was required to be spent on water efficiency projects. The estimated water savings from this investment has been transferred into water licences held by the Commonwealth's environmental water holder. But according to the Lamies, the Commonwealth's effort to save water becomes redundant because it allows caught floodwaters to replace the savings.
I'd imagine they're harvesting more water now than what they were before with their water licences.
It is unmetered water which has been caught off these plains.
You can't grow irrigated cotton without water. You have to get water from somewhere.
Chris Lamey blames the MurrayDarling Basin Authority and the Queensland Government for ignoring the lost floodwaters.
I'm blown away they don't count all this water. It's not even on their radar, all this water that comes across our farm.
Commonwealth taxpayers' money has allowed Norman Farming to acquire rights to an easement on which the contentious earthworks are built, and rights to a water channel running to a dam on a landlocked farm 11 kilometres from the river. Millions of dollars are also understood to have been paid to raise the height of this massive water storage, and similar expansion underway at another dam known as the Titanic.
They're selling their water back. Why do they need these huge dams? I've got less water. Why would I need a massive storage? Someone's not asking the right questions. They're obsessed with making this project a success, and I believe they think a success means the money is out of the account and the water is in the Commonwealth's account. They are not concerned one little bit about what happens thereafter.
We're going to the corner of our property, this is the Fraser Waterway.
Bruce Lamey is walking through what in flood time is a major waterway.
We're going to show you a big bank across Fraser's lagoons.
From here, there's a clear view into the next door property operated by John Norman. A wide bank, at least 1 metre high, runs as far as the eye can see.
If you look across the top of the fence on the other side is sort of level with the top of this post, and so is the bank. Last year's floods, the water come down here and was built up against these banks.
Norman Farming describes this bank as a private access roadway constructed long ago. Back towards the river, a second waterway.
This is where all the action happens. This is where the McIntyre's really got to pump through here.
During a big flood, Chris Lamy says more water runs through here than down the river itself. But last year, he says much of it was blocked by Norman Farming's private access roadway in the distance, which, according to Chris Lamy, has been consolidated over the past 5 years.
Yeah, just no approval, no permit. We've got 4,000 acres underwater here, and that is high and dry. And this is where 2/3 of the river's water goes, and if it's going to make it down to the Barwon, down to the Darling, it's got to get through here, and this wall is part of what's stopping it.
The Lamys asked Bill Johnson, former director of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's environmental water planning, to assess the effect of their neighbours' earthworks.
It looks as though the area upstream of the main works, particularly the main levee, where the Lamy property is, functions as a surge area that holds water even temporarily to allow it to be then moved to other storages.
The water is held on our property to hold the water up, so he had time to pump it. The pumps run here non-stop for 7 weeks. Every night, we live in quite a high house up here on the plain, and the night the motors turned off, it was a relief.
The Lamys' downstream neighbour Clay Marr took us to see what's left of a levee he says was constructed by Norman Farming. He says it blocked a flooding creek last year.
This side of the creek there was nothing, it was dry. The other side of the bank there was just basically a full flood.
He says Bungunya, a small village nearby, was dry too.
Now they get their town water from there, bath water, house water, garden water, they had nothing.
Gundawindi Shire Council responded to the farmers' complaints. Last October, Clay Marr and the Lamys received letters saying that illegal earthworks had been identified and that the owners had been requested to remove them.
It's a good, clean, green town.
But the council has changed its tune. You haven't, as a council, directed any removal of structures?
Not at this stage of the game. It was acknowledged that there was non-approved structures there, and the correct process to do that is to give the applicant the chance to go through and get them approved, and that's what's happening.
OK, so you can build structures that aren't approved?
No, you shouldn't, no. But it's very, very ambiguous on what's a levee bank and what's a road and all the heights and all that type of thing.
The council says it's waiting for expert modelling of the impact of earthworks on flood flows commissioned and paid for by Norman Farming. If the modelling justifies any unapproved roads, levees or banks, the council says the works will be approved retrospectively. Is there anything wrong in the way that process works?
Well, you've got to have a process, and that's a state process, so it's not up to me to say whether it's right or wrong.
But the big question is whether the Commonwealth's $13 billion plan is putting more water back into the river system or not.
This is hardcore Commonwealth money, and no one's checking that it's been spent in the right way.
In my view, it's extremely serious. It couldn't be more serious. The government has put $13 billion aside for this, and it seems as though it isn't getting good value for money.
I mean, is it getting any value for money when you look at this kind of operation?
In some parts, I think no. In some parts, I think the outcomes are perverse. I think the outcomes are possibly the opposite of what they were intended.
Lateline asked the responsible federal and state government departments how much water had been recovered from its multi-million-dollar investment in Norman Farming. But due to privacy considerations, no details on individual projects are publicly available. The Queensland Department of Natural Resources and Mines, which decides where the money goes and whether it's been spent properly, confirmed that all it required at a project's completion was the signature of an engineer or irrigation professional to confirm the integrity of the works.
I've contacted the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. We've emailed for months. I've told them my problems and what I think's happening on a whole for the basin, and they are absolutely not interested in what I've got to say.
These poor buggers, it's, yeah, be heartbreaking to go through what they've gone through. And no one should have to do that. Nobody.
This has taken us to a place where no one should have to go. We're just trying to be businessmen, we're trying to be farmers. This is a dream of mine to be a farmer, and it's just being crushed.
Everybody downstream should be concerned about it. Even though that's a big operation, it is still only one of many. And there are many on the McIntyre River, there are many on the other rivers in the Northern Basin. All of those rivers in an arc from the Paru, the Condamine Ballon, all the way around in a big circle down to the Macquarie near Dubbo, flow into the Darling. And this sort of work is happening on all of those floodplains, right across the Northern Basin. So it's profoundly significant.
Well, the water is backed up in Queensland and it's not getting into New South Wales. Well, it should end up at the end of the Murray-Darling, where it should end up. It should run out the mouth of the Murray eventually. Somebody's got to do something about it and, yeah, shut this down.